An old man in worn-out clothes walked toward a mechanic shop. The workers stopped what they were doing and started laughing when he offered to fix the engine of a Porsche Panamera in exchange for a meal. "This isn't a place for handouts," mocked Ethan Cole, the shop owner, laughing along with the car's owner. But what Cole hadn't learned yet was that sometimes the one who seems to have nothing at all is exactly the person who carries what no one else can offer. And a general was about to prove it. That morning, Duncan Wilson had woken up on a park bench nearby, his stomach empty for more than 24 hours. It wasn't the first time he'd gone hungry, but at 72, each day on the streets weighed heavier than the last. Walking along the main avenue, he heard the sputter of an engine. A red Porsche Panamera sat parked in front of Cole Motors, its hood open, steam rising from the radiator. The owner, Taylor, a man in an expensive suit, waved his hands angrily while talking on the phone about an important meeting he would miss if the car wasn't fixed right away. "Excuse me," Duncan said as he walked closer. "Mind if I take a look?" Taylor ignored him completely, staying on his call, but Ethan Cole, watching from inside the shop, stepped out to see what was going on. Cole had inherited the business from his father and prided himself on serving plenty of high-end clients. "Hey, old man," Cole said with a mocking grin. "This isn't a place for handouts. Try the shelter down the street." Duncan took a deep breath, used to that kind of treatment. "I'm not asking for handouts. I saw the engine's got a problem, and I can help." The three mechanics on Cole's crew stopped working and gathered around, curious. Jake, 27, was the first to laugh. "Man, look at this guy. Probably hasn't had a proper shower in weeks." "Let me guess." Kenny, another young mechanic, chimed in, still mocking. "You're some kind of Porsche expert, right?" The third crew member, Tom Lewis, just 22, didn't laugh. He'd learned from his late father, an Army veteran, that everyone deserves respect no matter how they look. "Please," Duncan pressed on. "All I need is a meal in return. I can fix this engine." Taylor finally hung up his phone and looked at Duncan with irritation. "Are you serious? My car's worth more than you've probably seen in your whole life." Cole decided to turn the moment into entertainment. "All right, let's give our expert here a chance." He gestured theatrically. "If you can point out the problem with the engine, I'll buy you a burger, but if you can't, you walk away and don't come back." The veteran glanced at the Porsche, then at the tools hanging on the shop wall. Slowly, he pulled an old wrench from his worn-out backpack. The metal was dark with age, but still solid. Duncan began examining the engine. His movements were precise, deliberate. He didn't waste time on obvious connections or unnecessary checks. In less than 2 minutes, he spotted the problem. A small cooling hose had come loose, causing the overheating. "Here it is," he said, pointing to the hose. "The connection slipped. Just needs to be reset and tightened properly." Cole leaned in, skeptical. "Anybody can guess that. Let's see if you can actually fix it." With steady hands, Duncan adjusted the hose connection using his wrench. Then he checked the coolant level and asked them to start the car. The Porsche roared back to life, smooth and steady. No steam, no strange noises. Taylor looked surprised, though unwilling to admit it. Well, maybe that was just beginner's luck. "Fine," Cole said with the same mocking tone. "A burger, like I promised. Now get out of here." "Thank you," the veteran said simply, taking the cash Cole handed him for a burger. As Duncan walked away from the shop, Tom kept watching. The way he'd fixed that engine wasn't luck. It was the work of someone who truly knew what he was doing. The following afternoon, the veteran returned to the shop. This time, there wasn't a broken-down car outside, just the usual business of the place. Cole was at the counter going over some estimates when he spotted him walking in. "Oh no," Cole muttered. "Here he comes again." Duncan stepped inside with the same calm as the day before. "Good afternoon. I came to offer my services again." "Listen, old man," Cole said, standing up. "This isn't a place for people like you. You'll scare off my customers." Jake and Kenny stopped working to watch. Tom stayed focused on the engine he was taking apart, but he was listening closely. "I'm qualified," Duncan answered evenly. "I worked with engines for over 20 years. "Yeah, sure," Kenny mocked. The veteran didn't answer right away. His eyes scanned the shop, taking everything in. It was a far cry from the military garages he'd worked in decades earlier. Just then, a customer pulled in with a more complicated problem. It was a classic Mercedes-Benz from the 1980s, the engine making a strange noise none of the younger mechanics could identify. "That's the third old car this week with issues," Jake muttered in frustration. "These vintage engines are a pain." Cole leaned over the Mercedes listening to the sound, but he couldn't pin it down. "I can help," Duncan offered. "I told you I don't need your help," Cole shot back, annoyed. But the customer, a middle-aged man, overheard. "Let him try. I've taken this car to 3 shops already and no one's fixed it." Cole hesitated. Losing a customer out of pride wasn't good business. "Fine, but if you make it worse, I'll throw you out." The veteran approached the car and asked for the engine to be started. He stood silently for a few minutes, just listening. He didn't need fancy equipment. Experience told him exactly where the problem was. "Shut it off," he said. With his rusty old wrench, Duncan got to work. He removed a few parts with precise hands, uncovering a failing water pump. "Incredible," the customer murmured. "How did you know?" "Experience," Duncan replied. Jake stepped closer, curious now despite his earlier attitude. "Where'd you learn that?" The veteran paused for a moment. "In the Army. Kept plenty of vehicles running over the years." "Army?" Tom finally spoke up, joining the group. "Yeah. 1st Cavalry Division," Duncan said, continuing his work. 23 years of service." Cole folded his arms, still skeptical. "Anybody can make up a story like that." Duncan didn't respond. He kept working on the Mercedes, replacing the water pump with steady, familiar movements. When he finished, the engine ran smooth and quiet. The customer was thrilled and paid for the repair. Before leaving, he turned to Duncan. "Thank you. You really know your stuff." Once the customer drove off, the shop fell into silence. Cole was clearly unsettled. He didn't like admitting it, but the veteran had solved a problem his team hadn't been able to diagnose so quickly. "Just lucky again," Cole muttered, though without the conviction he'd had the day before. Tom stepped closer to Duncan. "You said you served in the 1st Cavalry Division?" "That's right," Duncan said, slipping the wrench back into his pack. "My grandfather served in Vietnam," Tom said. "He always talked about the Army mechanics, said they worked miracles." The veteran gave him a faint smile. "Sometimes we didn't have a choice. Either we fixed it with what we had, or we got stuck in the middle of combat." Jake, listening in, seemed less hostile now. "Must have been tough." "Every situation was a lesson," Duncan said. Cole broke in. "All right, nice story and all, but this is a serious business. I can't go around hiring guys off the street." "I'm not asking for a job," the veteran replied calmly. "Just wanted to work for food when needed." At that moment, another customer rushed in with an urgent problem. A work truck had broken down on the road, and the owner needed it running by the end of the day for a critical delivery. Cole checked it out and realized the repair would take hours. He looked at his watch, then at the veteran. "If you can fix this by 5 o'clock, Cole said, "I'll buy you 2 burgers and a soda." The veteran accepted the challenge. While he worked on the truck, Tom watched his every move. By 4:30, the truck was running perfectly. The customer was so impressed he left a generous tip. "This guy's a master," he told Cole before leaving. When the man drove off, Cole looked at the veteran differently. It wasn't full respect yet, but it wasn't contempt anymore either. It was the start of a change neither of them realized would go deeper than they imagined. The next morning, the veteran arrived at the shop just as a man in military uniform stepped out of an Army Jeep. The officer froze on the sidewalk when he saw the veteran approaching the entrance of Cole Motors. "My God," the officer murmured. "It can't be." The veteran stopped at the sound of the voice. He turned slowly, and his eyes locked with the officer's. For a moment, both men stood still. "General Harris?" the veteran said in surprise. "Sergeant Wilson," Harris replied, hurrying forward. "Duncan Wilson. I wouldn't believe it if I weren't seeing it with my own eyes." Cole, who had been sorting some parts near the entrance, watched with curiosity. Tom, Jake, and Kenny also stopped what they were doing to see what was happening. "What are you doing here, Sergeant?" Harris asked, taking in the worn state of Duncan's clothes. Duncan lowered his eyes for a moment. Hard times, General. Since I left the Army, things haven't been easy. Harris looked around, noticing the shop and the young mechanics watching. Do you know who this man is? He asked Cole. A homeless guy who keeps showing up asking to work for food, Cole replied with disdain. Harris's face hardened. This man was one of the finest mechanics our Army ever had. What? Cole asked, baffled. Sergeant Duncan Wilson, Harris said, his voice firm with authority. He kept more vehicles operational under impossible conditions than any other mechanic in this division's history. Jake stepped closer, stunned. But he's living on the street. Harris sighed. Too many veterans struggle once they leave the service, but that doesn't erase what they've done for this country. Cole stood in silence, processing what he had just heard. The man he had treated like a beggar was a decorated Army veteran. General, Duncan said softly, there's no need to talk about that. It's all in the past. No, it's not in the past, Harris replied firmly. What you did is written in history. By then, a few customers who had paused to watch were whispering among themselves. This shouldn't be happening to a veteran, Harris said, visibly angry. Jake, who had mocked Duncan in the days before, also stepped closer. Man, I'm sorry for what I said earlier. I didn't know. Harris nodded with approval at the change. Duncan, you still have so much to give. Your experience is worth more than you realize. Cole stayed quiet, watching the transformation unfolding inside his shop. The man he had despised was now respected by an Army officer and admired by his own crew. Duncan, Harris said, I have to go now, but things are going to change around here. Trust me. After Harris left, the atmosphere in the shop was completely different. Duncan was no longer seen as a nuisance. He was a veteran who had served his country and deserved respect. But the real transformation was only beginning. A week later, Cole Motors was unrecognizable. Duncan Wilson arrived every morning right at 8 o'clock, no longer as a beggar, but as a mentor to the team. Cole had offered him a formal job, teaching the younger mechanics, in exchange for a fair wage and a small apartment that Cole and General Harris helped him rent. Tom had become his most dedicated apprentice. He showed up early, eager to learn the techniques Duncan had developed over decades of experience. Jake and Kenny, who had once mocked Duncan, now competed for his attention, eager to pick up his skills. Cole himself had gone through a complete change of heart. Early that week, he had apologized publicly to Duncan in front of both his employees and customers. I judged you by your appearance, not by your character, he had admitted. That was unfair and foolish of me. Duncan was grateful, and his greatest satisfaction came from working with purpose again. For years I felt useless, he confessed to Tom. I thought everything I knew didn't matter anymore. You all proved me wrong. The shop began attracting new customers specifically because of Duncan's growing reputation. He took on the toughest cases, often fixing problems that other garages had written off as impossible. 6 months later, Duncan Wilson had become a small local celebrity. The city newspapers ran his story. But he remained humble, focused on his work and on teaching the younger men. Sometimes, Duncan told Tom as they worked side by side on an engine, the greatest lessons come from the hardest moments. Living on the streets taught me humility, but you all showed me it's never too late to start again. Tom smiled, adjusting a part with the precision he had learned from him. Duncan glanced out the shop window, at the street where he had once spent so many nights. Now every morning, he walked down that same street on his way to a job that gave him purpose and dignity.